Hello, everyone. Today is June 16th. This is a SIG release meeting. This is a meeting that is recorded and available on the internet, or will be available on the internet. So please be mindful of what you do and say. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, and in general, just be awesome people. So we've got a super light agenda, but it is probably one of my favorite agendas in agenda items in many moons. So we have been talking about this on and off, kind of in the background for a little bit. I kind of probed some of you during KubeCon and in some private conversations, and I think that we're ready to do this. We had been talking about what does SIG leadership look like overall, and I think that you may have seen my mailing list thread, my mailing list note, but essentially it amounts to, I think that leaders will naturally present themselves by the work that they do and the impact that they have. And I think that over time, definitely the last few cycles and even before whatever the last few cycles means, a few people have been stepping up in a really big way, and you've seen that as you've seen that as a result of them being promoted into brought into the release managers group or promoted into a full branch manager or patch release team member. And obviously I think the natural progression of things for on the release team side, where you shadow, you lead, you shadow for the lead spot, and then you eventually do the lead spot. So I think in all of that, we have some clear delineators of what it looks like to take on more responsibility in the SIG. And I think that two people on this call have been really doing that. So Sasha and Jorge, I would like to invite you to become technical leads for SIG release. Do you accept?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Stephen. It's really an honor for me.
Same thing. I very much accept, and thank you very much for the opportunity to continue serving.
Good. We can give you all the work now. So what we're planning to do is so one, for people who are not necessarily familiar with Sasha's work, with Jorge's work, Sasha has, I think the proof is in the pudding. Honestly, if you go to Kubernetes release, Sasha has the top commits behind me. He's been working on improvements across release notes, across the Krell release toolbox, and doing really thorough reviews for a lot of people. I think that the review stance alone that he takes is sign of leadership. But all of these ideas that he comes up with on the release engineering side have been incredibly useful, as well as just finally seeing them get implemented, right? And kind of having someone that I know is going to be responsible for reviews and approvals as we move through that has been very helpful. Knowing that we don't have the bandwidth to take care of everything, right? And having reliable reviewers and approvers alongside, and I think Sasha has been one of the most reliable for that. So that's the release engineering side, and on the release team side and CI Signal, I think Jorge has gone above and beyond for one, running the release team, the efforts that he has made across multiple cycles for CI Signal, and the fact that he just keeps continuing to run with some of that stuff, having conversations in CI Signal across multiple SIGs. I saw that you recently did the SIG node test failures group, updated that, and you've been working through SIG node to kind of improve more of the community's overall test posture. So we're going to do, I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to keep the two of them in their specific areas of focus for a little bit as y'all ramp up. The first thing I'd like you to do is work on a playbook. We have no playbook for what it means to be a chair or technical lead. So that will be your first task. Um, and learn how, like basically learn how to, just the way we do on the release team, learn how to do it and then document it. And I think that the in terms of areas of focus, Jorge, I would like you working on executing on the CI Signal subproject and continuing to bring people together around testing. Definitely working closely with people like Dan and Nico to work on some of that stuff. I know that both of you have also been working with Lori to talk about optimizations, the release team, and overall processes. I want you to continue that work. And then outside of that, just be there to mentor people. Be there to just be there. I think that's what this is going to allow us to do. It's going to defray some of the day-to-day burden from Tim and I, and we can start to focus on some more strategic efforts for the SIG. I think that we're starting to get a lot of traction in some of the work that we've done over the past few cycles. So this will just give us some time to think strategically, start writing policy docs for things that have been missing for a while, and start to target what we're going to be doing over the next the next year, next 2 years. So yeah. Tim, do you want to jump in and say words too?
Words. Congratulations. I mean, this is just a recognition of the work that the two of you have done, and I think it's also a reminder for everybody else here, like we need people. People is how we get stuff done, and we need a regular influx of new people. I think as I look at the list of people, oh wait, no, Dim's joined. I was going to say, basically everybody who is in this meeting right now wasn't involved in the SIG when I started. And that's kind of awesome. People have needs to move on to other things, and if we don't have new folks coming in, then that means things kind of just stop. So I'm really happy with the extent to which people are coming in and that you are all finding a place to contribute and doing that across a longer span of time, that it's not just sort of the release team in one quarter, that people are coming in and doing more deep work, and we're making some nice progress on cleaning things up and modernizing and getting to a better place in how we're doing the release. So thank you all.
We have created some things that did not exist when we started, which has been really exciting. And I think one of the nicest notes that I saw was the note from Jace on the mailing list, because Jace is the one who brought us in as SIG chairs. So so a lot of seeing people bring on new chairs and technical leads is we're getting to see kind of the next generation come in, right, and start working on things. So I don't say that in terms of age, because I think we're all we're all in similar age spans, but I say that in terms of kind of like just progression of the community. This is when I started this, I definitely did not know any of the things that I know today. So take your time, jump
And you
in.
probably slept better too.
Oh,
The things we have learned. Oh, the things we have learned.
the Inago nightmares and so we have announced it. We're going to hold for lazy consensus timeout of June 18th. That's Thursday at 4 p.m. US Eastern. Going to start thinking about what PRs we need to prep, because we've never done this before. But that'll all be merging in for the 18th. In the meantime, Sasha and Jorge, just continue to question the things you've been doing. Really look for optimizations in our processes, and offer to take on things where you can. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I said I was gonna cry, but So outside of outside of that, that's kind of what we had put up on the agenda. I see there is a deploy triage party agenda item. Who put that up?
Hi.
Hello, hello. Arno,
Yeah,
we
that's
meet
me.
again.
Yes. So just want to give some heads up about the Trish party. So I put the PR in charge of deploy Trish party in the community infra. So I'm just waiting for the GitHub token, and I think we'll be fine for the beginning.
Okay.
Basically, the current configuration just triage all the issue and PR for the current milestone.
Okay. Do we need, what's the best way to get a token to you?
One of the cluster admin need to add the token as a secret in the namespace.
Okay.
So I will just ping right now Aaron in the issue I create in the GitHub repo.
Okay. And I will create a user and a read token for that. It only needs read, right?
Yeah.
Read.
I think you can find everything needed in the issue. Let me just post the issue.
Yeah, it just needs read.
Okay, cool. All right. And I saw there were some recent triage party improvements too. There's like a Kanban style that
Yeah,
still
in
works
the
too.
one, I think it's the 1.2 version.
1.2 beta 1, yeah.
Yeah.
That is exciting. So status-wise, is that kind of current status for Triage Party, Marky and other folks?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Cool.
And I think this is the last part. Once the token is done, then I believe the DNS is done or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once the token part is done, then we're golden.
Sweet.
No, correction. The DNS is not done yet. It's just after we deploy
After
the
the
token.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Once the
But the
DNS and
DNS
token.
Yeah, but the DNS is just a small PR we need to make.
Yeah, that should just be a quick PR.
Yeah.
The big question: have we been documenting this stuff, Marky?
I have the documentation. It is extremely rough and raw, so I have to clean that up. But
Okay.
I will get that back in.
Sure. And that's shared between you, Veronica, Marco?
Right now,
others?
myself, Veronica, Marco, and I believe Lori has read rights to the doc.
Okay, cool. Cool. All right. So a non-SIG release announcement. First, does anyone have questions on Triage Party? Okay, cool.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Basically, I just run Trish Party against the KK repo, but do we need to have more repo in the configuration?
Yes. So eventually, especially if we want to start on a smaller scale, we could run it against the SIG release repo and the release repo. So ideally, this will not just be for that instance. Will not just be for the release team and bug triage. That instance will eventually extend, or we'll have multiple instances to work for release engineering as well as the other sub projects.
Okay.
Cool. All right, so next thing up is kind of a non-SIG release announcement, but I think it's a community-wide announcement, and it does affect, it's an opportunity to contribute, and it does affect some of the things that you may be doing. So we are proposing and we is a bunch of people. I think some of them are on this call, Daniel, Jorge, proposing a working group for naming, because naming is hard. And I think the impetus around this working group is everything that's going on in the world. We're interested in eliminating racist and non-inclusive language from the project. There have been some kind of great strides there already. I've seen some changes to the docs to eliminate whitelist and blacklist on the Kubernetes website side. But we need more. We need more. We need the effort to not be disjointed. I think that a single PR and discussion in one place does not necessarily lead to project change overall, right? So that discussion needs to happen somewhere. There was a discussion on the SIG architecture mailing list that I think the last time someone had commented on that thread was almost a year to date. Last time I was looking at it. And the discussion was around the way we discuss control plane nodes, right? So there are instances where you might see master roles held, or references to Redis, Redis containers with master slave references. So things like that, kind of trying to cull the documentation of racist or non-inclusive language. That is in the works. I announced that on the mailing list yesterday. I've been talking to a few people, and I think maybe we have 15 plus volunteers at this point for this effort. I think that part of what we want to achieve is the very obvious get it done, right? Change the references, but also establishing policy around how we talk about things in general, right? Creating a style guide for naming, but also putting enough groundwork down that we can shop that to other projects, or not necessarily shop it, but act as the exemplar for other projects in kind of the CNCF sphere. So that is the grander goal, and I'm going to be co-leading this effort, assuming it's approved. Let's not jump the gun. It's in talks right now, right? But the plan is to co-lead this effort along with Zach on SIG Docs, and Celeste as well, who has been doing review. Celeste is one of the technical writers at the CNCF, and Zach is everyone's familiar with Zach, right? Zach is one of the SIG Docs chairs, as well as a technical writer at Linux Foundation. So I think that that's a nice mesh of people to push on this when we're ready to go further upstream. So details to come. I would say that for anyone who's interested, I see Marky and Seth, you have your hands up to help. Keep a watch on KDev, and that will be the go no go for the working group, and once that happens, we'll be able to establish Slack groups and the various things that you do with SIG, the SIGs.yaml to establish a working group. So once we have a place to land and mailing list, I think that we can start jumping forward. So sorry for the non-release specific announcement, but I think it's important.
It is fairly release specific though, because if you start looking at how we do the release, it backs up into Git and automation, and these things are also in our branch names. And it's gonna, I just did a quick grep. The word master shows up in the K release repo almost 2,000 times. And there's gonna be a lot of things to investigate and figure out. This isn't gonna probably be a simple mechanical change. Like we'll have engineering work to make sure that we carefully affect the change. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's important there is that we not only make the change, we make people aware of policies to prevent prevent a non-inclusive language from kind of coming into the project. I see that potentially something that we can do is a pre-submit check with a word list or something, right? That once we scrub references, we can also prevent new references. I think it's not just scrubbing the existing things we have. It's also making sure that going forward, we don't let that happen. So yes, it will be quite a bit of work. I think some of the interesting parts that from the technical side, you'll get to scratch an itch. So I think that docs, in terms of responsible parties, sponsors for this, I see steering, docs, contributor experience, and architecture as potential sponsors. And from the architecture standpoint, I think if you look at the way we name things, right, but from the API level, right, it becomes a larger discussion around can we just change the name of this thing, right? If it's an API object, not as simply, right? So how do we have a meaningful yes, Lori, eventually. Well, no, the answer is no. Is there a way to roadmap the changes? No, but we will. And that's part of the reason for the formation of this group. I think that prior to this, we said that a lot of people were interested in doing this, and we had chats on mailing lists, but nothing concrete, right? Maybe a few PRs here or there. So the reason that we want to form the group is to hold a group accountable for doing this work and a body to rally volunteers around. So yes, with that, we would want a roadmap as well.
And common best practices, like if we all stumble through changing our Git configs and we all break them in parallel and resolve things painfully, like that's not an optimal way about things.
Yes, there is something like that already, Lori and Dims, a to-do list. So once we get further along with what's happening with this group, we'll unprivate that list. But yes, there is something like that already.
I would like to add that this is extremely important, and I'd like to thank the leaders that have taken up this.
Thank you, Marky. And thank you additionally, because a lot of people from SIG Release had reached out to me about this, and so calling two of you out specifically, Daniel and Jorge. Thank you for saying that you're interested and knowing that it's something important for the project to do. Okay, any questions on that? All right, rolling right along. So someone had put up the 119 release schedule change. Would you like to talk about that? Or we should talk about it. Tim, are you the one who put it up?
Yes, I was just throwing that in there just to, oh my gosh, I cannot type this early in the morning with this little coffee in me. There's a link in the doc. You can click on it. It's a discussion from Kubernetes Dev yesterday. So we, as everybody would have seen over the last 2 weeks, we've had a change of focus, I think, in the, so message went out saying like, hey, there's a lot going on in the world. If you're taking time to do things, we understand from a project as leads for your SIG, if you want to cancel meetings or sub-project or working group or whatever, it totally makes sense. People have a lot of things on their mind and want to focus a bit on other things. Don't feel beholden to this project. I think a lot of us at big companies will say like project before product, but I think one of the things we're seeing is like real world community before our virtual open source project community, and just making that explicit. But that means that we weren't working on things and as much as consistently and to hold people to the same deadlines, like last week for docs, PRs initially, and all of the other things that ripple beyond that. If people weren't really working as productively in large parts of the community for a week or two, it's kind of our responsibility, I think, then to say, like, we're going to back things off a week or two. So that's basically what we had discussed in the release team meetings. And more broadly than that also, I mean, a lot of Slack discussion, but there's a question on the mailing list about how we'd achieved this decision. And just to sort of re-echo that here, we discussed this possibly coming in the last release engineering meetings, repeatedly in the release team meetings. But and I think it might have even been mentioned on the last community call meeting, that we're wondering if we might be slipping more things. I'd have to go back and look, but it's a reminder to us to think about how we communicate. We get focused in on the release things, and we do try to communicate these things broadly, but it's kind of always been one of the SIG's challenges to get the attention of other SIGs and other SIG chairs. So just something for us to be mindful of. I don't see any issues in how this was decided or done or the reason for it. So just wanted to mention that all here today.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of communication, we have more than we did before. We have more mailing lists to communicate across, and internally, we've seen that things like the release comms list is spun up, the release managers list is spun up. We even have
SIG
a
Contribex's chairs and leads one as well has been
and
really useful.
that's the big one. We've seen more activity across the SIG leads lists, as well as having a channel and and 2 monthly meetings to kind of chat about some of these things, and also I like that the meeting gives some intentional space to chat about things that are going on in a non-recorded meeting, right? So it's an opportunity for SIG technical leads and chairs to connect on a deeper level with their peers, that we don't necessarily, when we're doing all of this stuff, we're kind of on, and we're on for you, we're on for the community. So it's nice to have that space, and I think that has led to definitely more effective communication across the project. So I think we need to keep it up, but I do agree that I think what would be helpful is to have maybe, and who knows, maybe this is going to be a task for Sasha and Jorge, to have really understand the tiers of communication, right? When is it something that is SIG internal, right? And how do we communicate then? What does it look like when we're communicating to a smaller group of people? What does it look like when we're communicating to the entire community, right? So, for example, when we're working on the original 119 release change, that was not just me sending out the email, but myself, Tim, all of the release team leads and shadows in a group DM talking about what that change would look like, right? So is that what it takes to do a global communication? What's the impact of the change, so on and so forth, right? So I do think that it would be useful to understand how we do external communications, right? Have that clearly documented. All right. Any questions on that stuff? Okay. Well, on to Illumos. Illumo. Okay, go.
No worries. Illumos is correct.
Okay.
So yeah, last time I was online, the meeting unfortunately didn't get recorded because it was basically cancelled-ish. So I wanted to use just time here also to say hi from the Illumos community. Also just give a quick introduction of what we are, who we are. We are a operating system community, or a community controlled operating system development effort. It's basically a continuation of the Open Solaris effort originally initiated by Sun Microsystems and has been completely independent since a decade now. Yeah, we've have our own little framework where we do local containerization stuff, if people remember from Solaris or Open Solaris zones. And people have wanted to get more containerization into that, both with support for the Docker formats for images and other tools. And one of those tools people wanted to have from our side was Kubernetes. And so I started an effort to write a container runtime, a container network interface, and a container storage interface for the Illumos zone runtime. And I'll be doing a detailed write-up on a KCAP as soon as I have time. And basically, it's including Illumo-specific containers. So it's containers that are binary compatible only with Illumos. But also, we have an emulation layer for Linux called Alex branded zones. I can gladly go into details, but brands is basically our flavors of how we display zones. This is similar to example Knative versus a normal pod versus a virtualization pod in our terms. And yeah, there is a couple of things going on in the works, mostly enabling compilation of Kubernetes binaries on Illumos. And everything else is the idea to run or to have it implemented in the container runtime interface as to not to incur that many changes upstream for Kubernetes, as there are very stable interfaces available. So I don't think there need to be much changes. In later efforts, we can also talk about implementing other specificities like our network infrastructure, which features a full VMware-like distributed vSwitch in certain implementations, but that's further down the line if people are, well, however this project kind of turns out. But the initial phase of this is to get Kubernetes to run Illumos-based pods the same way it runs zones right now currently. No sidecar thought at the moment, although I'll probably do a little workaround because I need to read into what exactly are the requirements for sidecars, because I think the loopback interface needs to be shared throughout all the containers, and that we don't have right now. We could do it, but that needs changes on our sides in the C code, and that needs to be also verified and fixed like that. So that's the current status and idea of the project, and I'll do a write-up with a little bit more details and links to our manual pages and documentation with DCAP.
2 weeks ago, we kind of, in a light way, discussed some of the potential implications at a basic level as developers across the project develop. We've already gone through a phase of starting to move beyond Linux assumptions in the runtime environment as we added Windows support, but this would be another instance of similar, so just at a basic development level, but then also testing and how one sets up their own local dev and test environments, or more sophisticated test CI, which obviously then gets into the project and test infrastructure, how we do that and make sure we have signal on this, and release, if we do release artifacts for these targets, and how, and that there's different distributions of Illumos. You could think of Illumos maybe a little bit like Linux from a Linux kernel or a set of projects perspective, but then there are specific distribution instances of those and should be binary compatible across those. But there's variations, and we would have to pick and choose which ones we focus on just from a resources perspective if we're going to build and test on a particular one and learn how to use that. So a lot of learning, probably also some conformance thinking to do. So a lot of big changes. So one of the things that we talked about was, so Till had sort of come to us 2 weeks ago saying like, what do I need to do? How can I get added to the mix? And we kind of laid out, let's try to look at the past example of how the Windows work happened in the pre-KEP days and was complicated, and communication and planning are complicated on a big project like this. But let's start with a KEP to start outlining it. Let's start with some discussion with SIG architecture and see where we go from there.
Agreed. So yeah, so definitely of concern to me are the test infra implications that Tim mentioned, as well as resourcing overall, right? We need people who are experts in some of the stuff so that they can carry issues and do testing around platforms that we don't necessarily natively support. As well as providing CI instances for us to test against. So this has extended to SIG architecture, and I believe that this week, I'd have to check my notes. I believe that this week we're having a discussion in SIG architecture about some of this. So I'll be on that call too. And I would suggest anyone that's interested join that call as well. The big question that we have today is we already have a set of architectures and different variances that we produce as artifacts of the current release process, and they don't get the same level of rigor in testing as Linux AMD 64 does, right? So how do we bridge that gap, right? We want to cover not just operating system support, but also architecture level support. So how do we do that effectively as a project? That is the basis for that discussion. I think it's something that's super important because, as of today, if we get issues, I think, one of the ones that Ben had pointed out was there was an issue with kubeproxy for S390X architecture, right? And I think that was in 1.17. And that issue took a while to be closed. It was assigned to us, but we essentially had our hands tied because there's no way for us to test S390X, right, without getting getting some sort of sponsorship and expertise there. So we want to make sure that we have a clear plan from the architecture level, from the release level, on how we decide for or against bringing things into the project, right? Because not only do we need to do it, but we need to be able to support it when we do. So thank you. It's going to be a road. It's going to be a bit of a road. I would say before you start drafting things, hang tight for that SIG architecture discussion and see what falls out of that first, and then we'll sync up.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
And do you know where that meeting is and when, Till?
No, that would be
Okay,
actually good.
I'll drop a link in the agenda.
Yes.
Yeah, and let me actually make sure that that is the meeting that they're discussing it in. So while I'm doing that, Lubomir, I see you're here. There was a recent change to, or a PR proposed for change to some of the specs. I think the kubelet spec. Do you want to talk a little bit about that one? I have thoughts, but I haven't added them to the issue in PR just yet.
Sorry, did you ask me?
Yes. The I think it's a change to a kubelet spec in K release that you were commenting on.
Yeah. So the current behavior of the kubelets that we install in the packages is that it crash loops. So install the service, it crash loops and looks for a configuration file, which multiple consumers have objected to, including Windows, SIG Windows. The issue that was, sorry, the PR that was created, it comes from a ex-SUSE contributor. I guess they also saw this problem. But we had a discussion about his change in the PR in the Kubernetes office hours, and we think this is not the best approach. The correct approach is to install the service disabled by default. And once it's set up correctly by the runtime of Kubernetes, for example, we can enable the service and start it. So basically, this implies that we have to change the service file. But we should not do this for the patch versions of older Kubernetes. So there has to be a way for us to make such disruptive changes only to the new minor Kubernetes version. You know, in the old days, before I said this to Sasha, I believe, in the old days before kube package, we used to have a bunch of Go source code that conditionally set some, modified some aspects of the kubelet spec, for instance. This is difficult to maintain. I mean, it's doable, but I remember it was a bit of a mess that nobody wanted to touch. So yeah, short term we can do that. Long term, there has to be a way to have pretty much separate specs for you know, the separate versions.
So it's still a bit of a mess. The kubepkg is actually kubepkg is a refactor of that Debian build.go code, right? That included a bunch of the conditionals. So I ripped out a lot of the conditionals that are no longer relevant, right? If there are conditionals that were like, oh, after 111, let's do X, right? Conditionals that no longer made sense were removed. But yeah, we do have a place to add conditional logic for this stuff. Just to give you a kind of idea of the grand plan, because I know a lot of people were talking about the fact that specs should be content, and the content should be in the place where we hold all of the content, which is Kubernetes. So the reason for the initial removal of the package definitions and the specs on the Kubernetes side was that we had two, right? We had one that lived in, we had a set of specs that lived in Kubernetes, and we had a set of specs that lived in Kubernetes release. And it's they drifted, and it's kind of inaccurate. We had because the ones that we use for releases are the ones that are in K release, and the ones that we used in KK were strictly only used for testing. So the place that I want to see us get to is that we have a set of templates, right, that exist close to kubepkg, and maybe we can utilize kubepkg as part of the hack tools, hack tools within Kubernetes. But the idea is that we have templates in one place, and we have physical, we have the written specs somewhere else, right? So the near term was going to be occasionally some release manager comes in, writes the new specs for, basically runs kubepkg, gets the output of the new specs for 119, 118, what have you, and writes them to some repository, whether that be K release or KK, right? So we're not in that state right now, and we actually don't currently use kubepkg for the release process. That has to do with the way we interact with from the Google side, because we don't actually cut devs and RPMs. There's a set of build admins, our Googlers who have access to the apt and yum repositories that we use for Kubernetes package publishing. So they use a tool called Rapture. Sorry, Tim has his hand up, so go for it.
I think for this we can make it simpler. We do have that big long-term stuff to figure out, but in this case, without going into the spec files and all of that, the one piece of content that we would need to change is the systemd unit file. So that could be managed distinctly from the other parts and more easily, I think.
No, because Debian for its package definition expects a directory structure, and it has to be laid down in that directory structure.
Sure, but conditionally laying out one file different versus everything is less. So it may be a little harder for the Debian side. It's definitely easy for the
It's
Red
easy on
Hat
the RPM
Fedora
side. Yeah,
RPM side of the world. But if it's just the systemd unit file, we could have two different systemd unit files, one that's default on, one that's default off, and the code that's choosing to pull them in could, in the Debian case, I guess we'd have to copy one or the other into the directory for use at packaging time. For the Red Hat one, we could just in the spec conditionally use the one that we want for a given version, since we don't have forked specs. But that feels more constrained.
It feels messy. I would prefer
It is. It's the
Yeah,
same mess that we have today, but I guess it's a question of do we leave this as will fix long term, like over the next year, or is it possible to put some conditional logic in now to make forward progress on this issue?
I would like to solve it, and we've made some strides in being able to solve it. Like this will be the change right here. If that was to merge into master, it would go into the next set of patch releases, right? And it's not necessarily something we want today. My big concern is that are we strictly like, does it fix it for KubeADM and break a whole bunch of other consumers, right? That's my big concern. Sorry, Lubomir, you have your hand up.
The standard choice. So in my experience, projects in the open source ecosystem do not default enable themselves, but leave it up to the distribution to make those choices. And I think we should follow that pattern. Now, I would get into an argument with myself whether we're a distribution, but I would say it makes sense for us to default not enable them as our things stand today in these packages.
So I don't disagree. I would prefer to have the consumer handle configuration before starting the service. However, given that our default stance, based on what we produce in the packages, is that it's default on, we are potentially breaking a lot of workflows by changing.
That would have to be a change only for 119 and forward if we were to do it, yeah.
Yeah. Which means we then need the conditional logic.
Yeah. So Lubo, what are your thoughts, and especially also on timeline? Like if this is in 119 versus in 123, how much pain does it incur you and your SIG at this point?
So the unit file change in particular, which is disabling the service by default, is more of a fix about a certain annoyance, and it's not that critical. Because we've seen people complain about it. They have workarounds, they patched service files, they have solutions for that. The bigger problem that we're going to face is the change in the drop-in file for kubeadm, which is the 10-kubeadm.conf. This file includes some kubelet flags that are soon going to go away, such as --kubeconfig, --bootstrap kubeconfig. The kubelet has plans to remove these flags. I don't know when, maybe 121. But when the kubelet does that, the file will no longer be compatible with this particular release version, and kubeadm has to adapt as well to comply with the change. And the change is going to apply only to this particular release, this particular snapshot of the dropping file. So at that point, we either have to, we are going to be forced to short-term use the conditional logic, or branch or folder these files somewhere. So yeah, that is, I don't know when it's going to happen. Maybe it might happen in 120. I do not know.
Gotcha. So if there are any of, I know there are a few discussions open already. Yes, Kat. Just be sure to loop myself and Tim in on those so we can give opinions. I think what we kind of deal with today is the assumption that the files will essentially be the same across multiple release and patches, multiple minor and patch versions. And we did have some conditional logic for the 10 kubelet kubeadm config before, but we've basically moved past the point of conditionalness. I think it was up until like 111 or something that we cared about the changes between those. So we can re-implement that, but what I'm hearing is that we need to finish up kubepkg. We need to get kubepkg in a functional state, and it sounds like it also needs to be imported in the hack tools for KK, so that we can generate, so that someone on KK can generate specs on the fly.
Yeah, in terms of something that Ben has been talking about for a long time, do you see us moving the specs in KK or back to KK?
Yes. So that's what I was alluding to at the beginning. The specs will move back to KK, but only once we've perfected what's happening near the release artifacts, right? So someone will come along, generate the specs for 119, say, right, and then publish them in KK, right? And those can be the specs moving forward for KK. Currently, the way the templates are laid out is kind of like templates latest, and then deb and RPM, right? The idea there is that there would eventually be templates 119, deb RPM, templates 118, deb RPM, so on and so forth. So I think that it's fine to get those back into KK. What I don't want is people operating off of the assumption that the stuff that is in KK is true and is going to be the stuff that we use for the release, when that is definitely not true today.
Okay, understood.
If we've wrapped up on that, I want to pop back to the IllumOS discussion. They're not on the SIG architecture agenda currently, so
Got it.
can we do you want to get that on there, or
I would
I don't know when they close their
say,
agenda.
yeah, I would say let's ping Ben, because he is the one who started the mailing list start on this. So I think it was supposed to be added to the agenda, and I guess not. Yeah, give me a second to. Okay. Inconsistently shipping CPU architectures which have no testing is the name of the subject for mailing list. I think let's queue it up in the next SIG Arch meeting that there was a +1.
I
But
had it in my head that was on KDev, but was that on the
it's on
SIG
SIG
release?
Arch.
Oh, it was on
It's on
SIG Arch.
SIG
Got
Arch.
it. Okay.
Yeah. And let me just pull up this. Let me get y'all the link. Okay, link is in the chat, and I'll put the link on the notes as well. Yes, lady. Okay,
I've got to drop. Bye, everyone.
cool. Later. And that said, so we'll follow up with Ben and SIGArch to make sure that gets discussed if they've got time in their agenda. And outside of that, we've got 2 minutes left. Are there anything parting words that people want to give? Okay. All right. Oh, I have one more. Late stage update. So we're also working on the Golang updates. We have the 114.4 update in flight. 114.4 is currently blocked on an etcd bbolt update. I believe that PR has merged, but we're still waiting for them to cut a release. So once that release is cut, we can bump bbolts within Kubernetes, and we should be able to move forward there. An additional blocker that we have right now is Bazel and dealing with repo infra. So repo infra holds Kubernetes / repo infra holds the Bazel rules _go. And we often need to bump the rules _go to be able to support a new version of Go. So before we can update to 114.4 or update to 113.12, which is also in flight, we need to update the rules _go. And I believe I already have a PR that's working on that. So yeah, stay tuned. Okay.
Can you link me to that PR?
No, sorry. Actually, I have I think it's local only right now.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, but I'll get that up. It's a secret PR.
It's been
No
painful.
secret.
Yeah, because I mean, like my the 114.4 one basically has nothing but test failures right now because of that. So and yeah, so coming soon. Stay tuned, and I'll poke both you, Veronica, and Marky when that's ready.
Yep.
Thank you
But
very much.
I was just wondering because, like, with Basil, my personal case, you never know if it's me or Basil.
Oh, same. Oh, same for sure. Yeah, that's. All right, y'all. So thanks for dropping by. We will see you next week for the release engineering one if you're hanging out there, and if not, in 2 weeks for the next SIG release meeting. Take it easy.
Cheers, everybody.